Hello, I'm James Azimoha. You're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. US President Donald Trump says Washington could end Iran campaign in 2 or 3 weeks, with forces set to leave very soon. 2 Indonesian UN peacekeepers killed by a roadside explosion in southern Lebanon, according to initial reports. And Japan and France agreed to step up coordination on Hormuz and Iran war. US President Donald Trump has suggested that operations could wrap up within weeks, indicating it may be nearing the end of its military campaign in Iran. Meantime, tensions remain high across the region.
The US President Donald Trump says Washington could end its military campaign in Iran within 2 or 3 weeks, adding that US forces would be leaving very soon as he signaled operations are nearing completion.
I would say that within 2 weeks, maybe 3. We're hitting them very hard. Last night we knocked out tremendous amounts of missile-making facilities. As you probably read or wrote, we knocked out. Excuse me?
Pardon me for interrupting. The U.S. will be gone or done with the war in 2 or 3 weeks?
I think we're 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah.
At the same time, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said the country has the necessary will to end the conflict, but only if guarantees are put in place to prevent further escalation, underscoring persistent gaps between the two sides. Tensions remain high across the region, with Iran's Revolutionary Guards warning they will target US companies, while continued attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz disrupt global energy supplies. Meanwhile, Israel says it is strengthening regional alliances to counter what it describes as the Iranian threat, as strikes and retaliatory attacks continue across multiple fronts, including Lebanon and Iraq. Despite signs of possible diplomacy, the situation remains volatile, with both sides signaling readiness to escalate even as they speak of ending the war.
The upcoming days will be decisive. Iran knows that, and there's almost nothing they can militarily do about it. Yes, they will still shoot some missiles, but we will shoot them down. Of note, the last 24 hours saw the lowest number of enemy missiles and drones fired by Iran.
Meanwhile, the United States is increasing its military presence, with a 3rd aircraft carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, joining 2 others already in the region. Against that backdrop, there is still no clear timeline for a ceasefire, with developments on the ground and ongoing diplomatic efforts expected to shape the next phase of the conflict.
Britain is looking to strengthen ties with Europe as Prime Minister Keir Starmer responds to rising global tensions and criticism from Washington. Keir Starmer says the Iran conflict could define Britain for a generation, warning of economic pressure similar to the 1970s energy shocks. He called for closer cooperation with Europe and confirmed plans to host 35 countries to explore ways to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. His comments come after renewed criticism from US President Donald Trump as relations between the 2 leaders continue to deteriorate.
And today I can announce that later this week, the Foreign Secretary will host a meeting that brings those nations together for the first time, where we will assess all viable diplomatic and political measures that we can take to restore freedom of navigation, guarantee the safety of trapped ships and seafarers, and resume the movement of vital commodities.
Tensions in the Middle East are rising again as recent strikes around Beirut have led to increasing casualties and signaled a further deterioration in the situation. According to reports, the attacks mainly targeted vehicles in the southern outskirts of the capital and nearby areas. The Israeli military said it carried out 2 separate strikes in the Beirut area.
On Wednesday, 2 Israeli strikes hit areas around Beirut. Lebanon's health ministry said at least 7 people were killed and 24 injured. The attacks targeted vehicles in the southern outskirts of the capital and nearby areas. They are part of Israel's escalating operations in Lebanon. Officials say at least 1,200 people have been killed and 1.2 million displaced so far. The conflict intensified after Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel. This came 2 days after Iran was struck by Israel and the United States. Israel then launched new ground and air operations. The Israeli military said it carried out 2 strikes in the Beirut area. The targets were a senior Hezbollah commander and another member of the group. It did not confirm whether they were killed. Lebanon's state news agency NNA reported that 1 strike hit a car in Kalda. 2 people were killed and 3 injured. The second strike hit vehicles in Jaynah. 5 people were killed and 21 injured. Hezbollah has not yet commented on the strikes.
A roadside explosion in southern Lebanon has killed 2 Indonesian peacekeepers and injured 2 others. According to initial investigation, the incident was caused by an improvised explosive device. UN officials condemned the attacks, with Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling it a violation of international law and calling for those responsible to be held accountable. Indonesia and the United States also condemned the attacks. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon has over 7,000 peacekeepers from 47 countries and will leave Lebanon in 2027.
On the 22nd, Hezbollah is
Brussels is dusting off its energy crisis playbook as tensions around Iran disrupts global markets. EU officials warn this may not be a short-term spike, but the start of sustained volatility with higher prices and slower growth ahead. Anita Sharma brings us more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Brussels pulls out its 2022 energy crisis playbook as the war in Iran threatens a prolonged shock to the global economy. After a virtual meeting of EU energy ministers, Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen warned Europe must prepare for sustained volatility, not just a short-term spike. This as oil and gas markets remain under pressure as uncertainty over key supply routes continues to drive price swings. Jorgensen said plans include proposals to curb grid tariffs and cut taxes on electricity. After the press conference, he said, quote, "The more you can do to save oil, especially diesel, especially jet fuel, the better we are. And that in a situation that might worsen, demand reduction is necessary." According to the EU, gas and oil prices jumped 70% and 50% respectively since the start of the conflict. This week, International Monetary Fund economists said the Iran war could shape the global economy in different ways and that all roads lead to higher prices and slower growth. 4 years ago, the bloc first deployed crisis-era measures after Russian gas supplies were slashed, including price caps, targeted subsidies, and broader market interventions. Jorgensen urged the bloc to consider measures that reduce fuel demand, including more remote work and public transport use while reducing highway speed limits. He later told reporters that, quote, "Even if there were peace tomorrow, there would still be consequences because energy infrastructure in the region has been ruined." The EU says its energy supply remains secure for now, but that stability cannot be taken for granted. There was broad agreement that coordinated action, both at the EU and national levels, is crucial to contain the impact of rising prices, especially for vulnerable households and businesses. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
The United States is in talks with Denmark to expand its military access in Greenland, including 3 additional sites on the Arctic island. The proposed locations are former American bases with existing infrastructure such as airfields and port access. If approved, the expansion would mark the first significant increase in U.S. military footprint there in decades. Washington is relying on a long-standing defense agreement that allows broad access, with officials saying discussions so far have been cooperative. Ukraine says it's ready to pause attacks on Russian energy targets if Moscow does the same, hinting at openness to an Easter truce. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv could reciprocate as both sides face pressure from rising global energy prices and ongoing strikes. But the Kremlin has reacted cautiously. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Moscow had not seen a clear proposal from Kyiv and stressed that Russia is focused on achieving a broader peace agreement rather than a temporary ceasefire. The exchange underlines how far apart the both sides are. Japan and France are stepping up coordination over the conflict involving Iran, focusing on energy, security and shipping routes. The two leaders met in Tokyo and agreed to work closely on reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Japan and France have agreed to strengthen coordination to help end the conflict involving Iran and restore shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. The agreement was reached during talks in Tokyo between Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and President Emmanuel Macron. Japan, which relies on the Middle East for around 90% of its oil imports, has already begun using its strategic reserves to ease pressure on its economy.
Regarding the situation in the Middle East, including developments in Iran, we confirmed the importance of ensuring safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, maintaining stable supply of critical goods, and the early de-escalation of tensions. We agreed to continue close communication on these issues. Later, over dinner, we will engage in deeper discussions, including perspectives on energy security.
France says it is working with multiple countries on proposals for a future mission to secure the strait once fighting subsides. Japan has indicated it may consider sending minesweepers, although any deployment would be limited by its pacifist constitution. Beyond the Middle East, both countries also agreed to deepen cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and signed deals covering critical minerals, civilian nuclear technology, and artificial intelligence.
During this visit, a roadmap for critical minerals and materials was signed, which will allow us to strengthen our partnership and diversify our capacity to partner with other countries and source our resources. Through innovation, we are also adopting common techniques for separating these rare earth elements.
The two leaders also confirmed they will maintain regular coordination on energy security and supply chains, following the agreements signed during the visit.
France is weighing new limits on how young people use social media as concerns grow over its impact on children's well-being. The proposed law has sparked debate among teenagers, parents and policymakers over where to draw the line.
France is moving closer to restricting social media access for younger users. France is moving closer to restricting social media access for younger users after senators approved a draft law targeting children under 15. The proposal is part of a wider global push to address the risks social media poses to young people, with countries across Europe and beyond considering similar measures. President Emmanuel Macron wants the law in place by the start of the next academic year in September, potentially following Australia, where a nationwide ban for under-16s came into force in December. However, the French Senate has taken a more cautious approach. While the lower house backed a blanket ban, senators amended the bill to target only platforms considered harmful to children. Other platforms could remain accessible with parental consent, with the list to be defined by decree. Some lawmakers warn a total ban could raise constitutional concerns and undermine parental authority.
We believe that while the blanket ban on social media for minors under 15 sends a strong message, it risks being unconstitutional and does not respect parental authority. We support a more targeted approach, defining harmful platforms by decree, while allowing access to others with parental consent.
Others argue restrictions alone are not enough.
We must therefore take effective action. But let's be clear, this text is merely a superficial law. It gives the impression of addressing a legitimate concern while refraining from truly tackling the root causes of the problem, because prohibition is not education. Banning minors from social media does not teach them to use it responsibly.
Meanwhile, young users who hold differing views on how far restrictions should go They say social media remains a central part of their daily lives.
It's true that our generation is often caricatured like that as the younger generation, always on our phones, etc. But that's because past generations didn't necessarily have access to phones, and they can't necessarily understand the positive aspect it has for us. It allows us to communicate, etc. So social media isn't essential, but it still preserves a small part of us, memories, photos, etc. And I think it would be a shame to lose that with a ban.
The move comes amid growing legal and political pressure on tech companies. In the United States, a jury recently found Meta and Google negligent for designing platforms harmful to young users, a decision that could influence future cases.
A major legal battle over birthright citizenship is now heading to the highest court in the United States, with President Donald Trump set to attend as judges consider whether his administration can change a long-standing constitutional right.
Birthright citizenship!
Hands up!
14th Amendment!
Hands up!
US President Donald Trump plans to attend Wednesday's hearing at the Supreme Court of the United States on birthright citizenship, becoming the first sitting president to observe oral arguments there. According to his official schedule, Trump will be present as the court hears his administration's appeal of a lower court ruling that blocked his executive order limiting automatic citizenship. Trump argues the policy has been misapplied and should not extend to all categories of non-citizens.
And this is not about Chinese billionaires or billionaires from other countries who all of a sudden have 75 children or 59 children in one case or 10 children becoming American citizens. This was about slaves. And if you take a look, slaves, we're talking about slaves from the Civil War. And if you take a look at when it was filed, all of this legislation, all of this, everything having to do with birthright citizenship, it was at the end of the Civil War. The reason was it had to do with the babies of slaves and the protection of the babies of slaves.
The case centres on an executive order signed at the start of his second term, which seeks to deny automatic citizenship to children born in the United States if their parents are not citizens or lawful permanent residents. The policy has faced immediate legal challenges and has not taken effect, with lower courts repeatedly ruling it is likely unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment, which guarantees citizenship to those born on US soil and subject to its jurisdiction. The administration says automatic citizenship can act as an incentive for illegal immigration and so-called birth tourism, where foreigners travel to the United States to give birth. Critics, however, say the order conflicts with the Constitution and established legal precedent.
What's at stake is the literal ability of individuals born in the United States to remain in the United States the rest of their lives as citizens, to partake of all the advantages of citizenship that our country offers. At the end of the day, the language of the Constitution is clear. And as a result, I believe we'll see a Supreme Court that comes down firmly on the same side that every circuit court judge and every district court judge has come down on, which is the side of the Constitution that says if you're born here, regardless of the immigration status of your parents, so long as they're not diplomats, you are a U.S. citizen.
Immigration lawyers say the case could have significant implications for families, though legal challenges have so far prevented any immediate changes. Protests have also taken place outside the Supreme Court, with demonstrators calling for the protection of birthright citizenship. The Supreme Court is expected to issue its ruling later this year.
Major tech companies are cutting jobs as they redirect billions into artificial intelligence, with firms such as Oracle and Meta announcing layoffs as part of wider cost-saving and efficiency efforts.
Oracle is laying off thousands of employees, including 491 roles in Washington state from June 1st, according to a regulatory filing. The company says the cuts are part of a reduction in force and other terminations. In a March filing, Oracle said it expects costs tied to its fiscal 2026 restructuring plan to reach up to $2.1 billion, largely driven by severance and related expenses. Oracle is increasing spending on AI infrastructure as it competes with major cloud providers. More than 70 tech companies have cut around 40,480 jobs so far this year, according to industry data. At Meta, several hundred employees were laid off in late March across teams including Reality Labs, social media, and recruiting. The company is planning sweeping layoffs that could affect 20% or more of its workforce, which stood at nearly 79,000 employees at the end of last year. Meta has forecast total expenses of $162 billion to $169 billion in 2026, alongside rising employee compensation as it invests heavily in artificial intelligence. CEO Mark Zuckerberg has said some projects that previously required large teams can now be handled by a single person, pointing to efficiency gains from AI.
After the break, we'll take a closer look at key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Georgia's parliament has approved changes to its election law, limiting who can take part in international monitoring missions. The move is expected to spark criticisms from opposition groups and civil society. Our Nini Nicolashvili has more.
The Parliament of Georgia has approved changes to the Election Code of Georgia that will now restrict international election observer roles exclusively to foreign citizens. Under the amendments, Georgian citizens will no longer be allowed to register as international observers in election monitoring missions. The law also introduces formal procedures for registering interpreters accompanying foreign observers. The changes were presented by David Metikashvili of the ruling Georgian Dream Party. According to him, limiting observer roles to foreign nationals will help ensure more neutral and objective assessments, free from what he described as internal political influences. The amendments come amid a broader wave of legislative reforms introduced by the government following the 2024 elections. Authorities maintain that these steps are aimed at defending state sovereignty, strengthening constitutional order, and preventing political manipulation within key democratic processes. However, opposition groups and civil society organizations are expected to criticize the move, arguing it may reduce transparency and limit local involvement in election oversight. Nini Nicolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Azerbaijan has dispatched a new shipment of Russian grain by rail to Armenia on Wednesday, with cargo departing from Belajari station in Baku. The consignment includes 5 wagons carrying around 349 tons of grain. Since the route was opened, more than 23,500 tons of grain, along with over 1,000 tons of fertilizer and other supplies, have been moved along the corridor. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has arrived in Russia for a working visit, where he is set to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin today. He was welcomed at the airport by Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin ahead of talks at the Kremlin. The leaders are expected to discuss the bilateral ties as well as prospects for Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, broader regional issues, and the development of economic and transport logistics links in the South Caucasus. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has confirmed contacts with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, but denied that negotiations are underway. Our Turaj Shivalilu has more.
I am reporting from Enqilab Square in downtown Tehran, where preparations are carried out for funeral of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Navy Commander Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, killed in Israel-U.S. attacks recently. The war is 5 weeks old, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that contacts are underway with the U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, but not in the form of talks. In an interview with Al Jazeera, he said Iran receives messages from Witkoff directly as before, but it does not mean that Tehran and Washington are in negotiations. He ruled out reports suggesting talks between U.S. and Iran other than his ministry, and added, all messages are either conveyed through the foreign ministry or received by it. Iran's top diplomat also revealed that there are communications between security agencies of the warring parties without providing any details. As the war entered its 33rd day, Araghchi held phone contacts with Azerbaijani Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov and his Turkish counterpart Hakan Fidan, discussing with them the latest developments. In the contacts with Bayramov, he urged all countries, especially those bordering the Caspian Sea, to adopt a clear and decisive stance regarding recent attacks on Iran's coastal areas of the Caspian Sea. And in the call with Fidan, he said Iran has not launched a missile at Turkey and warned about repeated false flag attacks. He said that Tehran is committed to observing the principle of good neighborliness and respecting Turkey's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, expressing Iran's readiness for joint technical investigation into the incident. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from downtown Tehran, Foreign News.
China and Pakistan have proposed a 5-point initiative calling for an immediate ceasefire and peace talks to de-escalate the Iran conflict following high-level talks in Beijing. Both sides stress that diplomacy is the only viable path and pledge to step up efforts to maintain regional stability.
China and Pakistan have jointly launched a 5-point initiative aimed at de-escalating the ongoing Iran conflict, calling for an immediate ceasefire and urgent peace talks. The proposal was announced following high-level talks in Beijing between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, as both countries step up diplomatic efforts to prevent further regional escalation. The plan's key elements include an immediate cessation of hostilities, the start of dialogue between all parties, and strict protection of civilians and non-military infrastructure. It also stresses respect for sovereignty and calls for maintaining stability in critical global shipping routes, especially the Strait of Hormuz, which is vital for energy supplies. Both Beijing and Islamabad emphasize that diplomacy is the only viable path forward, backing Pakistan's role as a potential mediator and even offering to host talks. The initiative shows growing efforts by the two countries to position themselves as stabilizing actors in the Middle East amid intensifying conflict. Manu Maktoum, A-News, Beijing.
Turkey has condemned a controversial new Israeli law expanding the use of the death penalty, warning that it will be applied almost exclusively to Palestinians. The legislation has drawn criticisms from international actors and rights organizations. Our correspondent has more from Istanbul.
Turkey on Tuesday condemned a death penalty law approved this week by the Israeli Knesset, saying the law would apply almost exclusively to Palestinians. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said the legislation was aimed at entrenching what it described as Israel's apartheid regime against Palestinians. The ministry said the legislation was a continuation of what it called Israel's policies of denial, annihilation, and political executions, and declared that the law was unlawful. Ankara also called on the international community, including the United Nations, to respond to what it described as racist and unlawful measures taken by Israel. The bill was approved by the Knesset on Tuesday, with 62 lawmakers voting in favor, 47 against, and 1 abstention. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu voted in favor of the legislation. Following the vote, Israel's hardline National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir called the move a historic day. Israeli officials say the law is intended to strengthen deterrence against what they describe as terrorism, particularly in response to attacks on Israeli civilians and security forces. The legal amendment expands the scope of capital punishment and allows for executions in certain cases with reduced procedural requirements. Along with Turkey, rights organizations and UN experts have warned that the new sentencing rules would likely apply almost exclusively to Palestinians. Ahead of the vote, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy all expressed their deep concern, saying the measure risked undermining Israel's stated commitment to democratic principles. This is Adam Maro for A-News in Istanbul, Turkey.
At least 18 people have died after an inflatable boat carrying migrants sank off Turkey's western coast in Mughla province. The Turkish Coast Guard said the vessel was spotted early Wednesday morning near Bodrum and tried to flee despite repeated warnings. Rescue teams, including a Coast Guard helicopter and 3 boats, have so far saved 21 people. Authorities have not disclosed the boat's origin or destination. Central Eurasia's space ambitions are in focus at the 2026 Space Technology Conference as Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Turkey present key updates on satellite programs, launch capabilities and human spaceflight. Here's more.
At the Space Technology Conference in Tashkent, participating countries are outlining how they plan to expand their presence in the global space industry, with a strong focus on national capabilities and international cooperation. Azerbaijan, represented by Azercosmos, continues to position itself as a regional satellite operator. The country currently operates multiple telecommunications satellites, including Azaspace 1 and Azaspace 2, and hosted last year's STC conference in Baku, reinforcing its role as a regional hub for space dialogue and commercial partnerships.
Well, at the time, we also participating at the Space Technology Conference, and I think the conference itself is very saturated with the valuable content. As such, we view it as a platform to encourage regional and international cooperation, such as with member states, with the leading key industry players who are also interested to contribute to the ecosystem of the Central Asia. So in general, we've managed to meet several key industry players and agree on the future cooperation.
Kazakhstan remains central to global space infrastructure through the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the world's first and largest operational space launch facility. From Baikonur, numerous international missions are launched, including crewed flights to the International Space Station. At the same time, Kazakhstan is working to develop its own satellite capabilities and digital space technology through national programs. Turkey has made significant progress in recent years, particularly in human spaceflight. In 2024, Alper Gizerafchi became the country's first astronaut, completing a mission aboard the International Space Station. Through the Turkish Space Agency, Ankara is also advancing satellite production, lunar mission planning, and expanding its domestic aerospace industry.
Well, you know, you are in a very rapidly developing region here in Central Asia, and being one of the leaders within the region, I think, gives you a very strategic advantage. The global space community is always looking for new markets, new actors, and I think Uzbekistan has positioned itself perfectly as one of key players in the region and an equal partner also for international cooperation.
Together, these developments highlight a broader regional shift, as Central Eurasian countries invest in space technologies not only for innovation, but also for economic growth, connectivity and scientific advancement. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
Kazakhstan and China are stepping up efforts to strengthen one of the key transport corridors connecting Asia and Europe as shifting trade patterns continue to reshape global logistics. During high-level talks in Beijing, the two countries agreed on new targets to significantly increase rail transit volumes and expand capacity along the route. Our correspondent in Almaty has the more.
By 2029, Kazakhstan and China plan to increase container transit along the Trans-Caspian route to 3,000 trains. The agreement was reached in Beijing during a meeting of the Bilateral Railway Transport Subcommittee. The sides reviewed the current state of rail freight and confirmed plans to expand transit along the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, the corridor linking China through Kazakhstan with the Caucasus, Turkey and European markets. They also agreed to continue upgrading the ports of Aktau and Kuruk on the Caspian Sea to increase capacity. The corridor is already showing strong growth, with freight volumes reaching around 4.5 million tons per year. Container traffic is expanding most rapidly, driven by simplified customs procedures and improved conditions for international transport. According to transport officials, closer coordination between countries and operators along the route has played a key role in improving efficiency and overall performance. As a result, delivery times have been cut significantly. What once took between 28 and 32 days now takes between 13 and 17 days, making the route increasingly competitive for global carriers. Fariza Kalimurza, Almaty, A News.
After the break, we'll discuss Kyrgyzstan's push for a more connected middle corridor as members of the Organization of Turkic States gather in Baku. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. First Deputy Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers of Kyrgyzstan, Adibek Kasimaliyev, is in Azerbaijan today for critical talks on Turkic integration and bilateral investment. To help us understand the strategic weight of the visit, we're joined by Sheradil Baktagulov, Director of Institute for World Politics in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you for inviting.
Now, Kasimaliyev is attending the second meeting of the heads of government for the Organization of Turkic States in Baku. Beyond the diplomatic formalities, what is the most urgent economic priority for this group as they work towards the Turkic world vision of 2040?
Yeah, that's really a great question. And the most urgent economic priority is the full implementation of the Turkic World Vision 2040 program through concrete, actionable projects with a specific focus on three interconnected areas. Number one is launching the Turkic Investment Fund. This fund is viewed as the primary financial mechanism to turn the Vision 2040 into reality. Number two, developing the middle corridor. The Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, as you know, is the most critical physical infrastructure project, and the urgency is driven by its rapid growth. Freight traffic has increased sixfold in the last 5 years, and it also required modernization infrastructure. I mean, upgrading air hubs, railway stations, and seaports along the route, and digitalization logistics, creating a digital monitoring center using artificial intelligence to optimize and manage the corridor. And number three, boosting industrial cooperation. The OTS member countries are working on industrial cooperation program, which will outline specific priority projects for member states. So we can say the group working, the heads of governments and deputies will work together towards the Turkic World Vision 2040. The most urgent task is to shift from planning to action, from vision to action. This means should be actively using the Turkic Investment Fund to finance tangible projects, accelerating the development of the middle corridor, and launching new industrial partnerships to create a more integrated and resilient regional economy from the South Caucasus to Central Asia.
Now, speaking about the middle corridor, this route that connects Asia to Europe through the South Caucasus, how critical is it for Kyrgyzstan's participation in this route for Azerbaijan's ambition to become the region's primary logistical hub?
In Kyrgyzstan, we think that Kyrgyzstan's participation is highly valuable because it completes the strategic, new, and geographically diversified artery that significantly strengthens Azerbaijan's central role in the middle corridor. Plus, China is the largest consumer market and the largest producer of goods. Therefore, the volume of trade turnover is huge. This is millions of tons of cargo annually. And we think that there is a need of different routes. Therefore, there is a need for different routes, and Kyrgyzstan is offering one of such routes.
Now, the Azerbaijan Kyrgyz Development Fund, which you highlighted upon earlier, recently saw its capital increase to $100 million. In your view, which sectors, ranging from energy, agriculture, or technology, stand to benefit most from the influx of joint capital?
Based on recent project approvals and official statements, The energy sector, specifically small-scale hydropower stations, appears to be the most immediate and significant beneficiary of the increased $100 million capital. And also this is closely followed by the textile and manufacturing industries, which also represent a key focus of the fund's initial investment. Anyway, agriculture and tech are awaiting major projects. And while the energy and textile sectors are the clear early winners with concrete projects already underway, the fund is structured to support diversified portfolio. And agricultural sector, along with the areas like tourism, infrastructure, tech, remains a strong candidate for future investment as the fund deploys its expanded $100 million capital.
Now, Kasim Aliyev is expected to meet with President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan. What does this high-level access signal about the current personal and political rapport between the leadership in Bishkek and Baku?
Well, in few words, I have to say that the high-level access between Bishkek and Baku signals an exceptionally strong and rapidly deepening relationship, formally elevated to a strategic partnership. And the personal rapport between the leaders of Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan is presented as the primary driver of this intensified cooperation between two countries, which has now been codified across economic, political, and energy sectors.
Now, one of the focus areas of this visit is digitalization. Is there a blueprint for a unified digital customs or trade system between Turkic states that could bypass traditional bureaucratic hurdles?
Well, yes. And the fact is that the member states of the Organization of Turkic States do have a comprehensive and actively implemented plan to create a unified digital customs and trade space. The goal of this initiative is to minimize traditional bureaucratic barriers and expedite the passage of goods. The digital custom, the Turk Trade platform are being developed. It is a universal digital ecosystem for online trading, united manufacturers, logistic companies, and trading structures. Also, I have to say that there are some projects within the under the World Trade Organizations, like e-tier opportunities, which should be used for minimizing customs clearance procedures along all state borders.
Now, with Kyrgyzstan looking to diversify its energy sources and Azerbaijan expanding its gas exports, is a formal energy swap or transit agreement a realistic outcome of this working visit?
Well, it works already. The strong political rapport of the leaders of Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan is backed by substantial economic commitments and institutional mechanisms. The most concrete example is the Azerbaijan-Kyrgyzstan Development Fund, which has had its authorized capital increased, as you say, to $100 billion to finance major projects on a non-interest basis. And also, the leaders of the countries have personally given a start to deepening energy cooperation, which is moving from simple fuel supplies to joint exploration, extraction, and refining projects involving Azerbaijan state-owned company SOCAR. Kyrgyzstan has also expressed a strong interest in joining the Central Asia-Azerbaijan Trans-Caspian Green Energy Corridor project, which would connect the two regions' energy systems and markets. So I think Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan are doing great in this energy sector cooperation field.
Now, given the ongoing instability in the Middle East and the border issues in Central Asia, to what extent will regional security be discussed behind closed doors, despite economy and trade making the headlines?
This is an insightful question that gets to the heart of how diplomacy often works. The public agenda versus the private strategic one behind the closed doors. And while economy and trade will undoubtedly dominate the official statements and media headlines at any major summit or bilateral meetings involve the Middle East and Central Asia, regional security will almost certainly be the dominant, if not the most critical, topic behind closed doors. For leaders in the Middle East and Central Asia, the calculation is simple. You cannot sign a 5 or 10 billion US dollars trade deal for a railway or, let's say, a port if you cannot guarantee that the railway will not be bought by a non-state actor or that the port will not be caught in the crossfire of regional military escalation. Therefore, while the public agenda will be dominated by the optimistic language of connectivity, investment, and economic diversification, the private agenda will be consumed by the pragmatic, often grim, calculus of threat mitigation. The closed doors will be where the real politic of counterterrorism, terrorism, military procurement, great power hedging, and water conflict is negotiated. The threat headlines are the outcome of successful security discussions. So in this regard, we hope that this alignment will further reinforced by their shared membership and active cooperation within the Organization of Turkic States. And in this regard, we think that we will continue our joint work on issues like the development of the Middle Corridor transport route, but we will see and calculate it, they will take into calculation the threat of possible threat of regional tensions, whatever it will be, the Middle East or Western Asia or Central Asia.
Now, recent reports show a surge in Kyrgyz investment into Azerbaijan's economy. Now, what is driving this sudden interest from Bishkek, and is it a sustainable trend or a temporary hedge against regional volatility?
Well, the available evidence strongly suggests this trend is sustainable. It's being driven by formal institutions like the Development Fund, infrastructure mega projects, the railway, China-Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan railway, and the long-term strategic vision of regional integration by the OTS and the Middle Corridor. And we have high-level political commitment. The partnership is consistently reinforced by the highest levels of government. The establishment of Business Council in December 2025 and regular meetings of the Intergovernmental Commission ensure that cooperation is institutionalized and not dependent on individual personalities. Also, we have aligned with economic logic. This is not a hedge against volatility, but a proactive strategy to create new opportunities. It's supported by major international financial institutions like the Asian Development Bank, which notes that deeper regional cooperation is essential for sustained growth in Central Asia and the Caucasus. So in this case, we see that the economic partnership between Bishkek and Baku is a well-structured, multi-dimensional strategy. By pooling resources, building critical infrastructure, and creating robust institutions, both countries are working to secure sustainable economic growth and greater resilience in a complex geopolitical landscape.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for sharing your time and insights with us.
Thank you.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.